Hey, it's Matt from the Podcast Setup. Today I wanted to talk about Apple Video and Apple getting into the video game, something that they announced and started to support back in February of this year, February 16th. That's at least when the announcement came out, which you see up here on the screen. And this was the first foray into Apple saying we're going to take video and maybe podcasting a little bit more seriously. Just because it has video doesn't mean you're taking your podcast more seriously, FYI. You can still take your podcast seriously. In fact, most do in audio format. But the subheadline is Apple Podcasts will enable HLS video podcasts with a best-in-class experience for creators and users. And I think that is the most important part of all of this stuff. This isn't like Spotify supporting video podcast. This is not like YouTube supporting, obviously, video podcasts through their video native first platform. What Apple is saying is, hey, there's this, what I'll call open technology, HLS video. It's taking big, large video files and chunking it down into smaller bits and bytes so that it can be delivered over the internet faster, more efficiently, and more effectively at the end of the day. And what they're saying is, no, this is what we'll call a loosely open system here. This means that any podcast hosting company can start to deploy video to Apple, which is not the case for YouTube and not the case for Spotify. I mean, you can clone a audio podcast to a video on YouTube, and you can also probably take a video from your RSS video feed and send it to YouTube. But HLS is a much broader and better open standard because what it what it encourages is the whole app ecosystem to also adopt this. In other words, Spotify and YouTube sort of one-to-one. Like if you could deploy to Spotify and deploy to YouTube, that's great, but it's only for those one-to-one experiences. You're saying, hey, send this video over here. It doesn't help anybody in the market who's building podcast apps. More importantly, it doesn't help the podcast hosting companies with any kind of like bandwidth and load time, and also encourages the podcast hosting companies who have websites with their podcast hosting accounts to also display and play that video on their customers' website. So this is just my take on the matter, is that opting for HLS video means that there's a push for more openness. I mean, to a degree, Apple still wants to make money. Apple still is Apple, and there's definitely some walled garden effect here, most notably launching only with the four biggest in the space because they're the biggest ad drivers for podcasts, and Apple wants to figure out a way to make money, and that's totally fine. But we have it in Apple. And it's sort of a new frontier. We don't know what it's going to unfold so far with Apple Video Podcasts. We don't know what other features they'll add. Apple Podcasts, the app itself, has gotten fantastic over the last 2 to 3 years. It rivals my daily driver of Pocket Casts. And some of the really great features in there for especially chapters and transcripts, fantastic. Some of the best experience I've ever had in an app. If they start to continue to enhance video, that is a signal to creators to say, well, maybe we can do more with video on Apple that we can't do on Spotify or YouTube. That's for a different podcast episode. I'm calling this a podcast episode because that's how I'm treating it, though I don't have a proper RSS feed. I'm waiting for a friend of mine to do something at his podcast hosting company to allow me to host with him. But today, I want to point out some resources and just have this conversation with you about Apple Video. Up on the screen, for those of you watching, Pod News. This is a fantastic place, obviously, to follow all things Apple Video or podcasts in general, right? If I've mentioned this a million times on the channel and in the newsletter, Pod News is fantastic. James obviously does a great job. Most of you watching and listening and reading this know that about Pod News, but if you don't, definitely give them a follow. They just announced today, in today's news article, Buzzsprout launched their video solution to Apple. And that's the sort of milestone moment for me, because now we're going to see what I call the third-party independent podcast hosting companies. These are the ones who love RSS. These are the ones that, started audio first and just kept enhancing the RSS feed to do cool stuff with podcasting and for podcasters. Buzzsprout certainly being one of them. Transistor, RSS.com, and there's there's a huge list of those independent podcasts. Those are the three that I'm always sort of using in my world. So kudos to Buzzsprout launching this. I'm going to pull up their announcement post here on buzzsprout.com. It says video distribution to Apple Podcasts. Podcasting has always been about meeting listeners where they are, and now that includes video on Apple Podcasts. And Buzzsprout has Buzzcast, their podcast, which they started their own video version as of today. So if I go to the web browser of Apple Podcasts right here in the browser, and you can see that by the, aptly named video icon. And when I click to play this, we'll click on play.
Kevin, Jordan, good to see both of you.
I'm going to pause that right here. And now we have video from Buzzsprout, Buzzcast podcast right here in our browser. And I can scrub ahead just like any other video. It doesn't have all the cool features like a YouTube player has, but this is what I'm excited to see what Apple does with a public-facing directory of video, not just in the app, but on a browser. What else can I do? Will they lean into that YouTube-like experience? Comments, likes, share buttons, chapters, descriptions, all the other stuff that YouTube has added, like merchandise and membership and courses and playlists, and the list goes on. This is where I am hopeful from the creator aspect, where Apple comes in as a juggernaut and competes in the video space. We'll see. I mean, time will tell. We just got a handful of podcast hosting companies that support it now, with the list growing. I have Transistor up as well. Transistor, where I host a bulk of my shows, they're getting into the same game using HLS to distribute video across the ecosystem. You have to sign up for the waiting list, but you can check it out at transistor.fm/features/video, and you can sign up to the waiting list if you're a customer of theirs already. And the hope here is not only to see what Apple does with video, but to encourage more podcast hosting companies to leverage it thanks to HLS technology. And even further is to push the third-party independent apps like a Pocket Cast, like an Overcast, and many other apps around the world to support video as well. And not just support video, but the thing that I've been saying for many, many years now, many years, how long have I been doing this newsletter? That I've been saying for many years since I worked at Castos, that podcasting apps, podcast hosting companies, podcast directories, listeners, enthusiasts of podcasts should all be pushing for open standards to enhance the experience of podcasting. Podcasting 2.0 is the shining example of that, integrating new tags and new features, I call features for RSS, to make our experience of listening and now watching podcasts better, and just enhancing the experience all around. So Buzzsprout launching theirs, Transistor coming soon, and I'm sure there's many others that are going to start to do this. TrueFans as well has HLS video support. I will turn your attention to some other resources that might be fun and interesting to you as you follow along the journey of video support in Apple and HLS support of video. Let's not just stop at Apple. Let's understand that HLS video can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be on Apple. My friend John Spurlock, I like to call him my friend, I think we're friends, John Spurlock, over at livewire.io. You can go to hls.livewire.io and search for keywords. He just happened to tweet this out today, which jogged my memory. If you search for certain podcast hosting companies, I'll click on Transistor. You can see all of the HLS video supported podcasts that are being hosted at any individual podcast hosting company, along with some other criteria that he has on the list. So if you just want to explore to see what people are doing with their independent shows, with independent HLS, driven video, you can check that out. It's really cool to see John put this together. He does a lot of stuff with data and tracking data in podcasting, and I would definitely check him out at livewire.io. Fantastic stuff. Another friend of mine, Nathan Gathright, retweeted this, which is Media Bunny, a JavaScript library for reading, writing, and converting video and audio files into that HLS format. So if you're starting to experiment with seeing what you already do with maybe your YouTube files and what's it going to look like if I convert it to HLS, you might want to start dabbling in with something like Media Bunny. Chances are your podcast hosting company like a Buzzsprout or a Transistor are going to handle this stuff for you. But if you're like to tinker with things and try things out, you can check out Media Bunny. I think it's pretty cool. I've not used it, but just looking at some of the features, it's going to be a great way for you to test out maybe building your own HLS video library. I think AI is great for coding new solutions for our podcasts. If you don't get a lot of traffic with your podcast, and that's okay, neither do I, by the way, you could build your own video library hosting HLS, feeding into an RSS feed. You build your own video hosting, right? If you're down with something like that, uses the Mozilla license. I believe it's the Mozilla license. Let me just double check. MPL 2.0 license, so that it is open source. You can use this freely to convert your videos, et cetera, et cetera. So check that out as well. Just a fun little update from the world of video podcasting, and Apple sort of leading us into a new frontier. Hopefully things work out really well because I have a lot more faith in them, I think, enhancing podcast stuff for the open ecosystem over Spotify and certainly over YouTube, two companies that clearly want you to be in their ecosystem, where maybe Apple just wants you to be 30% in their ecosystem. If you catch the joke, podnews.net for all of your daily podcast info. James does a fantastic job. I don't have to tell you that. The podcast setup, I try to do my best every now and again here. If you like my take, subscribe to the newsletter. It's completely free. Subscribe to the channel where you're watching this. Thumbs up. It's not HLS video, not yet, until my friend who has a podcast hosting company gets me access to a new account soon, I hope. See you in the next video.